Today, we're going to be finding out if the art of coaching is obsolete. We are going to use AI to generate a training plan, and we're going to review it and see if it's actually any good and if it's going to put us out of business. For those of you that don't know, ChatGPT is AI software, and essentially it's like a chat machine, and you're just going to type in a prompt or a question and it's going to generate an answer for you. It's pretty amazing. It's going to give us a training plan here, and it's really detailed. I first heard of this concept when someone sent me a Reddit forum where someone had already come up with the concept. So credit goes to those guys over there, which were chatting about this way before we even thought of it. We're going to take those same prompts, just modify them a little bit for the sake of this video. So here we started with the prompt, which is just giving us a basic outline of all the components of a training plan. I've added another prompt so that it can start to organize my week for me based on training on a Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And it's given me 2 climbing days and 1 day which is focused on strength and conditioning. So we're going to start going through this plan, and I'm going to give you some feedback as we go through all of these sessions. The goal of this training plan is for a V4 climber to progress to V6, and I've given it the deadline of 6 months. First impressions then, and it's actually really detailed. Based on me giving it just a really short paragraph and request, it's given me a lot of information to go with. The climbing session includes warm-up, skill development, bouldering specific training, and then also it's got weightlifting and different exercises I should be trying to do in this training plan. It's also got some suggestions in there about recovery and progress and tracking your training. So some of the fundamentals of training theory have been put in here. Very quickly, I can also see some vagueness in this training plan, which can be really hard to interpret, especially if you don't have a good background knowledge of training. So where it says, for example, assess your strengths and weaknesses, especially finger strength and climbing technique, I can probably, as a novice, understand what assessing my finger strength means, but assessing climbing technique is definitely a little bit harder, and I might want an in-person coach to do that for me. The other thing that raises a little bit of concern for me is it's recommending campus board training, and I know a lot of V4 climbers where that probably isn't appropriate just yet, so potentially this wouldn't work for everyone that had input this as a V4 climber. In the weightlifting section, we've got deadlifts and squats. Now, I'm a big fan of these exercises, but again, I think a little bit of in-person coaching or even being able to ask a few more questions about those particular exercises would be useful if you've not done them before. Initial thoughts out the way, let's go do some of these sessions and have a look at some of the details. So I was about to get started, and the very first thing is warm up, 10 to 15 minutes, light aerobic, dynamic stretching and mobility exercises, which I agree with, sounds good, but that's very vague. So the beauty of ChatGPT is I'm just going to ask it for some recommendations of what exactly that warm-up would look like. So for the warm-up, it's generated a pretty big list of dynamic movements, a lot of swinging and rotating, which is good. I mean, for me, I normally rush through the warm-up, so this is actually going to be probably take a little bit longer, and I'm going to do a lot of different exercises than what I normally do, but we'll give it a go and we'll stick to the plan. Okay, summary of warm-up. I quite like all the lower body stuff. In fact, most people probably neglect a lot of their lower bodies. So if someone was to do that, probably do quite good for them. I normally do a little bit more stretching in the lower body because I like being flexible while I climb. So I try and get most out of that in my warm-up before I get on the wall. I have lacked quite a bit in my upper body. I generally do quite a little bit more. I would start doing some stuff to recruit the pulling muscles so that I kind of feel strong when I start climbing, but we'll stick to the plan into the climbing session. So I've now got 15 to 20 minutes of skill development. Now, I've not asked ChatGPT what this means, but I'm going to interpret it as focusing on good technique, good balance, good coordination. So I'm just going to do a few things in my warm-up now. I mean, I'm kind of extending this into my warm-up, and I just want to be climbing really well. Now, this can get missed as people start warming up, and because it's not hard, they throw away any focus. But I'm going to really focus on good hip movement, good foot movement, and try and make the most out of skill acquisition here. So the warm-up / skill acquisition technique bit is done. Now I'm going on to my strength part of the session, which is going to be some limit bouldering. But it wants me to do a beginner's hangboarding routine for 20 to 30 minutes beforehand. So over back to the training area, start doing some hangboarding. I think this now already starts to highlight one of the issues with this training plan. Here, And on Saturday, we're also doing hangboarding twice a week, including campusing. Now, a good coach should understand that when you start a new training plan, it needs to be very progressive and start to build up over time. You don't want to start week 1 as you mean to go on for the next 8-12 weeks, because that jump in training volume is really risky, basically. We don't want to do that. We want week 1 to feel really easy. So a limitation already I'm seeing in this plan is that although some of the content looks really good, the kind of long-term scope of it and how it's periodized is not very in tune with what we should be doing in our training. As a side note to the periodization bit, it does have a note saying adjust the volume and intensity of each session based on your fitness level. So it is kind of insinuating that it should be progressive or periodized and build up over time. However, in my experience, this is not that intuitive for most climbers. And I think most climbers at the beginning of any training plan will let motivation and psych build really high, and they just want to do loads of training. So actually, being a little bit more prescriptive or having someone pull you back a little bit is really helpful when it comes to periodization. I've also not really got any guidance on the hangboarding session itself. I could go back and ask some questions, but luckily I've been following the Lattice Training YouTube channel and I already know some hangboarding sessions that are useful for beginners. The hangboarding is done, and now onto some limit bouldering. I actually don't mind doing the hangboarding before the climbing bit, and this is something we do recommend because it can be quite short and you want high levels of recruitment, so you want to be fresh for your hangboarding. However, I would normally only do this hangboarding before climbing with someone that has quite a lot of experience already on a hangboard. If this was my first time hangboarding, it's probably not a great idea to be doing it before a climbing session, but let's just assume I'm happy with it and we're going to go in and do some limit bouldering now. On to the last bit of my session now, and I've got 10 to 15 minutes of core and antagonist training. So here it mentions planks, leg raises, push-ups, and shoulder exercises. So let's say shoulder press, but that is 4 exercises to do in 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll kind of just rush through these, I guess. And I'm gonna start with push-ups and shoulder exercises first, and then I'm gonna do the plank and leg raises. So that's the Monday session done. Now we have 2 climbing sessions a week at the minute, and our second climbing session is on Sunday. The only difference here is the addition of campus board training. Now this comes after hangboard training, so I'd do still 20 to 30 minutes of hangboarding, then 20 to 30 minutes of campus boarding, then up to an hour of limit bouldering, which is a pretty heavy session. You can't really drop the intensity of campusing and limit bouldering that much, so this does feel quite heavy for a V4 climber. Into our other training session, which has got no climbing in it, it's just a conditioning session. We have a number of weight training exercises to do. So we've got deadlifts, squats, pull-ups, bent over row, overhead press, bench press, and some form of grip strength training, so wrist curls or farmer's walks. It's a big session. There's 3 to 4 sets of each exercise, 6 to 8 reps. I don't really have any problem with these exercises for climbers. They're pretty much all good options. There is a lot of them. I know it's just one session of weight training, so you can do this much in a weight training session. There's definitely questions about how relative this might be to the individual. It's very generic. It's gonna hitting all the big muscle groups, big compound movements. So if your aim is just general progression, this could be really useful. But I also work with a lot of climbers that have a background in squats and deadlifts, for example, where this kind of stuff is just a waste of energy for them because they're already strong enough and they need to spend more time on the wall. Again, I would like to see a little bit more variation in prescription here, potentially starting in the first few weeks of a training plan with less sets of this exercise and potentially variations in the intensity. I know it does say that you should vary in the intensity, but again, a little bit more prescription here is really helpful. You don't really want to be going to failure in all of these sets, particularly in the first couple of weeks. You kind of want to build up to that over time, get the form down and get accustomed to the exercise. So some closing thoughts on what I think of this AI generated training program. The first thing is it definitely has a cookie cutter feel. And by this, I mean, it could generally be the same training program for many, many individuals. So it's not going to have that individual or personalized touch, which you want to get when you're working with a coach. However, there's countless many variables which are going to change the program from individual to individual. And if you have a boulder problem or specific goal in mind, like I did, then you probably want your coach to actually view that climb or view a video of it and sort of give you some feedback on how to tailor your climbing sessions for that goal. We've not tested it, but I probably get the feeling that the higher and more elite level climber you're working with, the less this is going to be useful, or the countless extra prompts you're going to have to put into ChatGPT to get the chat plan tailored towards your needs. The training content itself, I feel, was probably a little bit heavy to start with. Even with those number of sets, those number of exercises, there's still a lot going on if you're dropping the volume or intensity. It's gonna be hard to drop the volume basically. And as a newer climber around V4, I probably still wanna be climbing on that third day. I'd actually like to see a little bit less in the strength and conditioning, a little bit more in the climbing volume. With the intended 6-month training period that was building up to our V6 goal, there was also no variation in the climbing sessions themselves. It was just 2 projecting sessions a week, and I think I'd like to see a little bit more variation in there. Some sessions that were focused maybe more on mileage, getting more boulders rather than just always projecting, and potentially more repetitions, or fitting board climbing in there at some point a little later down the line. In my experience working with climbers on training plans, they want to see more variation in the sessions they're doing. If you're not really that interested in a training plan, you're probably quite happy doing the same session repeatedly for 6 months, but most people want a little bit more variation, and that actually helps with the motivation, and that's going to help with your progress. So is AI generated training plans a useful tool? Well, I think yes. For some, this is actually going to be really good, but you probably need a decent background of training knowledge to help fill in the gaps. Is it going to replace a human coach? No, not yet, I don't think anyways, because working with an in-person coach or remotely with a coach, there's still too many things that they can offer you which the AI generated plan cannot. And that's also just having someone to keep you accountable, someone to talk to about your training and talk about all the stuff that is affecting your climbing which isn't working in your climbing sessions. And coaching is far more than just the content of the sessions and exercises. You can get a lot from just being able to talk to your coach about all of the stuff that is happening outside and away from the climbing wall. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more training content, hit the subscribe button and we'll see you next time.